There's already some elections happening. We're just a couple of months into 2025, and the big election isn't until November 2026, but there's already some election stuff happening that I wanted to talk about. Kristie Bruce-Lane is somebody that's running for the state senate in the 40th out in East County, and last week we announced that she was endorsed by Sheriff Chad Bianco, which is awesome. We've endorsed her in the past. I'm sure we will as well. She's done a fantastic job. But I wanted to talk about one of her opponents. She just had a Democrat opponent jump in who's extremely anti-gun. She's actually on the San Diego City Council right now. Her name's Marnie Van Wilpert, and she's extremely anti-gun. She's extremely extreme as well. But Kristie's main opponent is a guy named Ed Musgrove. And we've talked about Ed in the past, but I wanted to talk about, there are three people I wanted to talk about. Ed Musgrove, Rebecca Jones, and John McCann are all throwing their hat in the ring right now. And we just praised the Republican Party earlier in the show on some of the things that they've done. But I got to tell you, these three running for office is kind of a mess for Second Amendment. In fact, not kind of, it definitely is a mess for Second Amendment. We've talked about Ed Musgrove, we wouldn't endorse him. I was looking forward to endorsing him for city council up in San Marcos, but his questionnaire came back and it was just an absolute disaster. It was very much a, guns for me, but none for thee kind of attitude. And it's just a shame that they're putting him up. And then he's even got pro Second Amendment supporters. And it really, truly proves that the Republican Party is not a pro Second Amendment organization. They're a political party.
Right.
Now, I think historically it's fair to say that we've had more friends on that side of the political aisle than we've had on the left side of the political aisle. But please never, ever get confused and think that the Republican Party is a pro-Second Amendment organization. That's not what their purpose is. That's not what they do. That's not who they are. And Ed Musgrove is being endorsed by a lot of people that are a part of the Republican establishment. And they don't care about the fact that he doesn't care about your Second Amendment rights. In fact, he'd be willing to take some of them away and doesn't think you should have, as free access, that we think that sane, trained, law-abiding gun owners should have to self-defense, which is what it really all boils down to. Rebecca Jones is running for supervisor. She announced she's running for supervisor up in North County. This is Jim Desmond who's being termed out. Jim Desmond is actually running for Congress, but he can't run for supervisor again because he's being termed out. So we have two people running, Republican Rebecca Jones and then Republican John Franklin, who's the mayor of Vista. Now, John Franklin's wonderful. He's been great on Second Amendment. He's been great as far as a local leader. He's somebody that puts his money where his mouth is, so to speak, when it comes to the Second Amendment. He doesn't just kind of pat the Second Amendment community on the head and say, oh, don't worry, I'm with you. He actually stands up for the Second Amendment, stands up for CCW, stands up for, everything that we stand for, and we're very appreciative of that. Meanwhile, Rebecca Jones, she was running for city council, or she was running for mayor in San Marcos after Jim Desmond left, and she courted us and promised us the sun, the moon, and the stars, and how she loved our women's program and this, that, and the other thing. And oh boy, does she want and need our endorsement. And then as soon as she was elected, she couldn't be bothered. We asked her, hey, could you just kind of show up and, shake some hands and meet some of the folks in the organization that you really wanted the endorsement from? She couldn't be bothered. Absolutely couldn't be bothered. I also think it's worth saying that, this is, in fact, next week is the 5-year anniversary of COVID. And it's not a Second Amendment issue, but it's definitely a political issue. In fact, I think it's the biggest political issue that's happened since Pearl Harbor. It's definitely the biggest change in politics and in culture it's impossible to ignore. We can't just say, well, gee, that's not a Second Amendment issue. No, it speaks to the type of elected official you are, how you reacted, and how you acted during that. And I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating. I was in a meeting just after the COVID shutdowns. In fact, they said, hey, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks. And that turned into, months. And about 2 months after the 2 weeks was up, there was a meeting in East County at someone's private home full of elected officials and myself and like one or two other people that weren't elected, but there were just about every Republican that you can think of in the county. Not every single one, but just about. And I went to this meeting with a plan and said, hey, here's what we need to do. We need to band together. We need to, put out a press conference. We need to say, hey, we're not going to abide by this, and this, and had an actual plan. Rebecca Jones was there and absolutely derailed the plan, completely derailed the whole meeting. In fact, talked about how she was scared. She was terrified. People are talking to her. She was not just scared of COVID, but she was scared of the repercussions of standing up, for people's rights. And I got to tell you, I think that her mettle was tested and she failed miserably. Twice, after we endorsed her and she got elected, and then we asked her, hey, could you just show up? And she refused. And then during COVID, I think her performance during COVID is absolutely ridiculous. To add insult to injury, one of the reasons that she bowed out of saying anything about the Second Amendment and, attending our meetings or, showing any kind of support for us is basically she said, well, gee, I'm on this city council in this small town that, Second Amendment doesn't really affect us. Doesn't really have anything to do with us. And then not too long later, she was publicly rallying against offshore drilling for oil. Now, I don't know if you've seen a map of San Marcos lately, but it's landlocked. They don't have to worry about drilling for oil offshore. And oh, by the way, that's not a city council, subject. But she was fine, running her mouth about that. But she isn't okay with standing up for your Second Amendment rights. That behavior shouldn't be rewarded. Mm-hmm. We have a very good candidate running for supervisor in John Franklin. Not endorsed yet, but I can't imagine he won't be. We endorsed him for mayor. We endorsed him for city council. But I think it's important that you guys know exactly what's going on with these candidates. The last one is John McCann, and I saved the worst for last. John McCann on the city council. He was actually on a school board, he's on a school board down in South County, and then got onto Chula Vista City Council, and he's now the mayor. Well, he came up to me a few years ago at an event and pulled me aside and said, hey, there's this vote that's going to happen that has to do with guns, and I don't think I have the 3 votes to defeat it. And I said, okay, let me work on your 3rd vote. And he said, yeah, and we talked about it, and he showed me the wording, and it was basically showing support for a gun ban, and it was showing support for a magazine ban, and it was showing support for expanding red flag laws or gun violence restraining orders. And we talked right there at the event and said, yeah, this is bad news. We don't want any part of a gun ban and a mag ban and expanding gun violence restraining orders. So I worked hard. I got him the 3rd vote. The 3rd vote was a Democrat on the city council. Her name was Jill Galvez. And Jill said, gee, I don't know if I want this heat. And I said, don't worry. We have your back. If you vote with us, if you vote what she believes in, she's very pro Second Amendment. We'll have your back. We'll stand up for you. The other part of it was, I said, we're not going to show up with 150 people and make this into a big news story. With you, you're the 3rd vote. It was a guy named Mike Diaz. It would have been John McCann and then her. And that would have been 3 votes and we would have won. So we laid low. I let John McCann know, hey, you got your 3rd vote. I sent him a text and I sent him a voicemail. I called him a few times and it went to voicemail. And he got his 3rd vote, Well, the night of the vote came and went, and I talked to Mike Diaz, who was on the city council, and I said, how did it go? And he said, well, I voted the right way. He said, Jill Galvez voted the right way, but John McCann didn't. And I said, well, what do you mean? How is that even possible? Well, he voted in favor of the gun ban. He voted in favor of the magazine ban. He voted in favor of the gun violence restraining orders. And when I called him the next day, he basically lied about it. He said, well, gee, you didn't have anybody there. I said, I know I didn't have anybody there. You and Jill and everybody else said they didn't want to make this into a big deal. We already had the votes. There's no reason to have 100 people there. And I said, regardless of not having people there, is this something you believe in or not? Do you believe in gun bans or do you not believe in gun bans? Why would 50 people showing up to talk about it, change your mind on all that? He lied about our interaction. He lied about what he was actually voting on. It was crystal clear that they were voting on basically saying, hey, we want a gun ban. We want to take these California gun laws and we want to expand them nationwide. And no uncertain terms. I mean, this is something he voted for. So there really is, and he's running for supervisor in South after Nora Vargas stepped down. There's no good option in that race. There's no good option, and I'm seeing people talk about John McCann like he's going to be some kind of breath of fresh air on the board of supervisors. You can't trust this guy, especially on guns. But, after I published, and by the way, this isn't the first time I'm bringing this up. I wrote a whole article about this and told everybody exactly what happened and exactly what he said. And he didn't even really deny it. He just said that I was being mean. that was his whole defense was, well, gee, Mike said, I was mean to him. Okay, yeah, I kind of was. But you know what? He deserved it. Yeah. He lied to me, he misled me, and then he voted the wrong way. I wrote about this years ago. And he absolutely does not deserve your vote. But the interesting thing was, after I published an article talking about how badly he screwed us over, I got people who had worked with him before in the past, people who knew him, who all kind of secretly reached out to me and said, yeah, this guy's bad news. When the vote's hard, he just gets up and leaves the dais. Wow. If you've ever seen him on an interview, he runs away. I mean, if you're telling me, if you're voting for him, if you're going, hey, you know what? Not everything is the Second Amendment. So he's bad on the Second Amendment, but there are other issues I'm concerned on. If any of those issues are controversial and you're putting your eggs in the John McCann basket, good frickin' luck. This guy's he's got no backbone. He's not going to stand up for you in any way. He's going to put his finger in the air and figure out which way the wind's blowing, and he'll be happy to backstab you.
Duck tail and run.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because all these folks are Republican. The ultimate John McCann story, though, is he right before he got onto the city council, he was at a restaurant, and a local activist came to talk to him while he was at a restaurant. He got annoyed by this activist for bugging him at a restaurant. They got into it, and they were yelling at each other. So the activist drove away. John's standing outside of this guy's truck, and the guy drove away. John reached down, picked up a rock, and threw it at the truck. Threw a rock, like Trevor Hoffman this thing, not tossed it, like, pegged this guy's truck with a rock. And what he didn't know is there was a security camera that caught it. And so NBC News pulled him aside and said, hey, we want to talk to you about it. And he said, oh, yeah, we got into it. It's not a big deal. And they said, well, we have security footage of you throwing a rock. He goes, oh, I never threw a rock. They were well, here's the video. Yes, you did. You threw a rock. He came out later. He stammered and, whatever. Came out later and said, oh, no, I dropped my cell phone and I was just bending down to pick it up. And then winding up and throwing it at an activist? I mean, no. You bent over, you picked up a rock, you threw it, and then you lied to NBC about it. Nothing good about John. This guy should be nowhere near power. And no one remembers this stuff, unfortunately. I, again, would put our vetting up against any organization in the county, period, bar none. I understand that we're laser focused on the Second Amendment. But it doesn't matter where they stand on the Second Amendment if they're not good quality candidates. And none of these guys are. Ed Musgrove, Rebecca Jones, John McCann, none of them are quality candidates. And, oh, by the way, none of them support your Second Amendment rights. And it's important that everybody knows this story. It's unfortunate that you don't have a choice down in South for supervisor. There's nobody to vote for, not John McCann, not anybody else. But at least in Rebecca Jones' race, you have John Franklin to vote for. And at least with Ed Musgrove, he's going to get absolutely clobbered by Kristie Bruce-Lane. She's a wonderful candidate. We look forward to supporting her and making sure that she wins and is successful in this run. So anyway, what do you guys think? Any thoughts?
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
In so many ways. Surprised, no. Unfortunately.
Surprised that they're being supported?
No, I'm sorry. I was stuck on McCann.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, nobody's really surprised. Everybody's kind of holding their nose. Even when I talk to people like, hey, what are you going to do in that race? They kind of go, they kind of have to hold their nose and vote for this clown. And it's just so unfortunate, and there's there's just nobody else in South County. There's nobody else in a position of power or authority or anything. There's nobody on the bench. He's it.
So what's the takeaway here? Go vote in your water board and your school, all the smaller things so that we can have better candidates in these higher positions, right?
There's a couple of takeaways. Number one, I'm absolutely bragging about the amount of vetting that we do for our candidates. There's no question that San Diego County Gun Owners vets candidates better than anybody in the county, any organization, period, probably in the whole state. The other thing is, you can't just rely on a party. You can't just say, hey, this guy's in the right party or whatever. Yeah. But also character's important, even in whatever John is saying or whatever any of these candidates are saying, but particularly John McCann, whatever they're telling you they're going to stand up for, if they don't have the character and the backbone to actually do it when the time comes, it just doesn't matter. You're not actually voting for what you think you're voting for. But I encourage you, become a member of our organization, get involved, help us continue to do the good work that we do. Vote for the right people. Don't vote for a party. Always vote for the individual. And, and don't just assume that a party or an organization of any kind has your best interests in mind when it comes to Second Amendment, because they will just absolutely sell you out. If it means like, hey, we might get a little bit more power, we might get a victory, we might get a win under our belt, and we'll sell gun owners down the river, to do it. Yes, they will absolutely do it. So, stay true to your convictions. And if you're not that motivated by the Second Amendment, I still say that, be motivated by the fact that we actually tell the truth and promote, quality candidates. So I think those are the takeaways. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'm Michael from Gun Owners Radio. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and make a comment. Help us out. Go to gunownersradio.com. Thanks for watching.